Set in a small village, the story will focus on a seamstress named Barbara, a young woman living alone after her mother passed away. She spends her days busy working as a seamstress, continuing her mother's tailoring shop. On this particular day, she is scheduled to visit the home of a customer who is about to remarry after having been a widow for a long time. Driving her small personal car, Barbara travelled through the dense forest and across a long bridge until she finally arrived at the customer's house.
Late!
And here was the customer, Grace, a widow who planned to marry today, with Barbara appointed as the main seamstress for her wedding dress. While Barbara was busy fastening the buttons on the back of the gown, Grace kept complaining about Barbara's late arrival, even bringing up the memory of her late mother, who had been more disciplined in her work. As a result...
Ow!
Yes, because Grace wouldn't stop talking. One of the buttons nearly fell into the ventilation shaft. As Barbara tried to retrieve it, Grace once again scolded her for being incompetent at her work. So, yes, Barbara intentionally dropped the button into the vent. And because she didn't have a spare button with her, Grace then ordered her to go back to the store and get back here as soon as possible. As Barbara was passing through the forest, she accidentally came across two motorbikes in the middle of the road, as if there had just been an accident, which turned out to be Yes, there were several packets of illegal substances and two guns scattered around. There were also two riders who were still alive, struggling to wrestle over a single suitcase, most likely filled with money. And so, Barbara was faced with a crucial decision, one that would determine the course of her life from that moment on. No one knew what Barbara was planning. She decided to open her beloved box and took out two threads, stretching them toward the two strangers. Still injured from the accident, the two men could only lie there in confusion, watching Barbara busying herself with something mysterious. And guess what Barbara was actually doing. After the two strangers ended up killing each other in a shootout, Barbara was free to take the suitcase and bring it home. At this point, it became clear that Barbara was no ordinary seamstress. She was a genius with an above-average IQ. After all, no ordinary girl could devise and calculate something so precisely as she had just done. But as Barbara got farther from the scene, she suddenly remembered the thread that was still tied and a needle that had snapped off. Quickly, she rushed back to the site to retrieve her needle. If she didn't, it could become evidence that would lead the police straight to her. After finding it stuck in the hand of the man with the helmet, Barbara ended up losing her needle again in a panic when the helmeted man turned out to still be alive and nearly shot her from behind. After cleaning up the scene, Barbara had no other choice but to take the helmeted man, who was still alive, back to her home, leaving the other man, already dead, behind at the site, unaware that her needle was still there, bent from being run over by a car tire. Upon arriving at her shop, which was also her home, Barbara immediately dragged the helmeted man inside and tied him up with rope. She then pulled him upstairs to hide him there until she could figure out a way to get rid of him. At such a critical moment, Grace suddenly showed up, coming after Barbara to demand the button on her gown that still hadn't been sewn on. And so...
Let's go.
After dealing with Grace, Barbara went back inside to take care of the helmeted man who had almost taken the suitcase from her. Finally, the helmeted man revealed the true chronology of what had happened. He and the young man who was left dead at the scene were originally conducting an illegal drug transaction. The helmeted man was the buyer, while the young man was the seller. It turned out that the young man had intended to cheat him by running away with the suitcase full of money, which led the helmeted man to chase him down, ending in a shootout between the two. The helmeted man then warned Barbara about the decision she had made that dragged her into this mess. For her information, the father of the young man who died at the scene was a notorious drug lord, infamous for being ruthless and cold-blooded. So, if the father were to arrive at the scene and discover his son dead, not only would the helmeted man be hunted down, Barbara would also be targeted, as she was now complicit in the young man's death.
What is your next move? Father, the boy you made me kill.
Barbara had the option to run away, but she couldn't bear the thought of leaving behind the house her late mother had left her. So, to face the drug lord, who would inevitably come, Barbara once again relied on her genius mind to make preparations. Armed with nothing more than needles and thread, Barbara devised a trap using the helmeted man and a gun that she tied and suspended as part of her plan. After that, Barbara immediately hid behind the table, waiting for the person who would soon arrive. And then... Yes. Barbara's plan to make the two of them kill each other failed when the helmeted man's gun had no bullets. She quickly fled into the forest behind the house to avoid the drug lord who would be coming after her. And then... Yes, truly unlucky. The drug lord managed to shoot Barbara in the leg, leaving her unable to walk. The consequence of her decision was a tragic death, as she was strangled until she ran out of breath. After finishing off Barbara, the drug lord checked the money inside the suitcase, only to find that it had been rigged with explosives. If all the money was removed, the sensor would trigger and it would explode. Realizing this, the drug lord left Barbara's lifeless body behind, a consequence of the choices she had made herself. And the story rewinds to the moment when Barbara first encountered the two strangers, still contemplating the decision she was about to make. In this second part, we see Barbara choosing the second option, reporting the incident to the police.
Okay.
Soon, the only police officer in this small town arrived, an elderly female officer. After inspecting the crime scene and confirming that both suspects were still alive, the officer grew suspicious about something missing, a suitcase full of money which Barbara had taken and hidden in the trunk of her car.
My
time pop in the hood.
As a result, Barbara now found herself handcuffed at the police station, along with the two suspects she didn't know. When the elderly officer asked what had actually happened, the young man named Josh replied that it was completely unimportant. What mattered most now was that they all had to leave immediately before his father, the ruthless drug lord, arrived.
You pissed yourself.
Scared of him.
Instead of paying attention to Josh's warning, the elderly policewoman was more concerned with Grace and her fiancé's wedding, which was being held in the room next door. Besides being an officer, she also occasionally acted as a marriage officiant, conducting weddings for residents who wanted to get married.
We're reminded of this when two people sanctity of marriage.
Realizing that she wouldn't survive otherwise, Barbara began looking for a way to escape. When she spotted the handcuff key lying on the table, her genius mind kicked in, and she persuaded the helmeted man to cooperate with her to reach the key.
Off your belt.
What?
And your shoelaces.
Still armed with just thread, a needle, and a piece of paper from the box, Barbara crafted a sort of blowpipe weapon on her own. Meanwhile, she instructed the helmeted man to remove his belt and shoelaces and toss them near the key.
Forward. It has to be higher.
After several attempts, the helmeted man finally managed to throw his belt near the key. Now, it was Barbara's turn to precisely shoot the needle with her blowpipe, and once successful, the helmeted man only needed to pull it to retrieve the handcuff key.
Carefully. Very gently.
Meanwhile, in the adjacent room, Grace was struggling with her gown, which was now missing its buttons. She had to use a safety pin that had come loose and ended up pricking herself painfully. Frustrated by the pain and wanting everything to be perfect, the policewoman remembered Barbara, who was in the next room. And so...
My dear.
Yes, Barbara and the helmeted man's plan to reach the key had failed. Instead, Barbara was asked to go to the next room to sew buttons onto Grace's dress. Once that task was completed, Barbara was returned to her seat, with the handcuff key this time placed on a coat hanger. Using the same method, but this time more difficult, the helmeted man managed to throw his belt right on target. Now it was Barbara's turn to thread her needle into the keyhole. And... yes, the helmeted man finally managed to get the key. However, unexpectedly, he broke the agreement by choosing to escape with the suitcase alone and tossing the handcuff key out of sight.
Fuck you!
Undeterred, Barbara had another escape plan. Using the nearby CCTV cable. She unplugged the cable and took out the wire, still with the needle and thread. Barbara planned to electrify the wire and... Too late. The drug lord arrived first and killed the policewoman, who had been slow to draw her gun. The lord then rushed into the next room and found his son handcuffed. As he was about to kill Barbara, the policewoman, who was still alive, appeared. After exchanging a quick signal with Barbara, she swiftly plugged the CCTV cable into the socket so that...
I don't know. No.
Tragically, Barbara was killed after being hit by several bullets, making her the sole fatality in this second part. The drug lord was merely knocked unconscious by the electric shock. The policewoman only suffered minor injuries thanks to her bulletproof vest. The man in the helmet escaped with the briefcase. Josh could only sit in silence, lamenting his fate. Grace and her fiancé could only show their sympathy, powerless to do anything. Once again, time rewinds to the moment when Barbara was confused about what decision to make. In this third part, she chose a different option, to leave without getting involved in other people's affairs. However, upon reaching her home and seeing the condition of her shop, uncertain of its future, Barbara decided to turn back, retrieve her briefcase full of money, and eliminate the two strangers to ensure there would be no witnesses. Unfortunately, the drug lord arrived earlier, and Barbara ended up witnessing the murder committed by the drug lord, Josh's father, against the helmeted man. Barbara immediately went to the nearest restaurant to find a safe place there. Soon after, the drug lord and Josh arrived in pursuit. Expecting to be killed immediately, Barbara was instead asked by the drug lord to help stitch up the wounds his son Josh had sustained inside the restaurant's restroom.
It's time to stitch. Stitch like a song.
While Barbara was stitching his wounds, Josh spoke about his father's cruelty, not only toward others, but also toward his own son. His father's authoritarian behavior had made everyone around him deeply resentful, including Josh himself. Feeling pity, Barbara asked Josh to hold a spool of red thread, for she had a brilliant plan to help him escape from his father.
Listen closely. In a second, then look for me.
Whatever Barbara was planning this time, she slowly pulled the red thread from Josh's hand to wrap it around the gun in his father's bag. Next, Barbara brought out a blue thread, stretching it to various points while playing music and dancing to divert attention.
I see.
Stitch like a song.
After that, Barbara handed the blue spool of thread to Josh. Now, Josh was holding two spools, one in each hand. Following the instructions given in the restroom earlier, Josh would pull both threads when the time was right.
I'm sorry.
What are you? What are you sorry?
Now it's your turn.
Not long after, Grace arrived to follow up on the buttons of her gown that hadn't been fastened yet. So Barbara immediately went out to attach the buttons.
Now is not a good time.
Excuse me. Barbara is meeting me outside.
Here, the father began to show his authoritarian side by forcing Josh to make a harsh decision. Either kill Barbara with his own hands or take his own life with a knife. And guess what Josh did? And yes, the father was killed by his own son thanks to the brilliant plan devised by Barbara. Here, we see Barbara's true nature, extremely greedy and selfish, as she took the suitcase for herself and left Josh alone in the restaurant. Quickly, Josh tried his best to chase her. However, because his leg was still injured and lame, he had to crawl just to get into a car. At the same time, Barbara was seen arriving at her house, precisely as she was taking out stacks of money from the suitcase one by one. Suddenly, yes, as we all know, the suitcase was equipped with explosives and a sensor device. Another interesting fact is that Josh was chasing her not for the suitcase itself, but to warn Barbara about the explosives inside. The third option Barbara chose, once again, led to her gruesome death. Time rewinds again, but this time not to the scene of the incident. Instead, it goes back to the moment when Barbara was about to drop the button into the ventilation hole. Realizing that acting on a fleeting emotion would only drag her into a bigger problem, Barbara decides not to drop the button. As a result, she doesn't need to go back home to get the spare button, and consequently, she never encounters the helmeted man or Josh. At the crossroads, Barbara was stopped by the drug lord, who only wanted to ask for directions. Her heart raced, thinking she might be killed. However, the drug lord only intended to give her 3 bundles of cash as a reward for the directions she had just provided.
Choices. Choices.
Finished. From Barbara's story, we learn an important lesson. Small decisions can change everything. Once she followed her emotions, a cascade of problems came her way, even putting her life at risk. But when she exercised self-control, thought carefully, and remained patient, instead of losing out, she gained 3 bundles of money without having to face any danger. The life lesson from this film is clear. Be patient, control your emotions, and think through every decision wisely. Sometimes, great fortune comes precisely from simple choices made with a clear mind. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Thank you.